Okay, you have to breathe heavy into the mic now.
No, I'm not going to try to mouth breathe into the mic.
No.
It's been a while. It's good to be back.
Is it? I know. We've changed so much. We've gone through
you
darkness.
You have a full belly button length beard.
I do.
It's weird.
I grew up really fast. I grew it in like 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
It's all the steroids. It's the steroids and the testosterone and the hair growth medication.
Wow.
It's done wonders for me.
You look. No, it looks great.
Yeah,
it's
thanks.
Weird that it's all white.
Yeah, I'm gonna be Santa Claus this year. I'm gonna be Kris Kringle.
You're the Gandalf of emergency management.
Wouldn't that be awesome? I want the staff. I want the hat. Those are the things. And you know why? Because he doesn't have to wear pants. He can just go all around all the day in a robe thing, and he's got a lot of airflow.
Yeah.
It's I really desire that.
Interesting.
We should talk about the show, should we?
Yes. We can. Yeah, we can talk about airflow.
A lot of stuff has happened. A lot of bad stuff actually.
Good bad stuff.
That's the problem with this show is that, MERS-CoV is here now. We're not even talking about that, but that happened.
We got to talk about MERS. Measles is coming back. I think we have mentioned that in a past episode.
Yeah.
A lot of storms.
All kinds of storms. We have earthquakes are happening now.
Yeah.
Fault lines.
Earthquakes?
Earthquake. Did I say earthquakes?
It sounded like you said earthquakes.
That's a new kind of earthquake featuring the Oort cloud. So we're going to have...
So we'll talk a little bit about the storms and storm mitigation.
Mm-hmm. We're going to do that. We're going to break down in really excruciating detail the South Korean ferry disaster, which is one of the most gut-wrenching. Like, I get so angry. So I don't even know how to. This may be an explicit podcast. We may have to put a little warning on it.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have a real listener question.
Yep.
Which is exciting for us, right?
Wait, they're all real, Mitch.
Oh, right.
None of them have been made up by us just to ask a question.
Nothing. We don't do that. We have integrity.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about some water system and problems that are happening. Kind of two extremes of the problems. We got up in the Pacific Northwest. Towns that have too much water and other places that are resorting to some pretty drastic measures to get drinking water.
Spoiler alert. And we're going to have a special guest.
Yeah.
We're going to have a really cool special guest.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We're not even going to say who it is.
That's right.
But she may be a future MILF. I'm going to just say that. And we're going to catch up on drones.
Yeah. I feel like every episode we're going to have some drone talk.
Yeah.
And because I kind of want to go on record now, like when the drones take over, this audio recording will last as we knew they were going to take over.
That's right.
We knew it was going to happen. It's on record.
Is it good though? Are the drones going to love us for that? Or
no, I don't think so. I think my last words will be like, I knew it.
That's right.
Listen to hazardspodcast.com. Also write us a review.
Yeah, that's right. Review us on iTunes. But not you, drones. We don't want you to review us.
We don't. Oh, magic to my ears, that song. It's been so long.
I missed it, right? Got a little boogie.
That's great. All right, let's get into it. So, news rundown. First article we have, How to Think Like the Dutch in a Post-Sandy World. So this is an interesting article. It comes from the New York Times a few weeks ago. And it basically compares the Dutch system of flood mitigation with the U.S. system. And it highlights a Dutch architect by the name of Henk Ovink. I'm not making up this name. This is great. This is just like a power Dutch name. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but it's okay.
Let's hope not.
Right. Henk Ovink. He was the director of the Office of Spatial Planning and Water Management in Holland. And he had met the U.S. Oh, I didn't write down this title. I think it was the Housing...
The HUD Director.
The HUD Director,
sure.
Thank you, yeah.
Which Mayor Bloomberg appointed as a special advisor in charge of the Sandy recovery.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so they met in Holland. He actually came over, the HUD Director or Administrator, and toured Holland. And then this Dutch architect asked him if he could come work for him in America. So he came over, and he wanted really to introduce this Dutch approach to flood mitigation. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like they promote community and regional preparedness over individual preparedness. So some things that they describe in this article are that they design parks in Holland that are parks most of the year and dry and totally habitable, but every once in a while when they have major floods, they use them as floodplains.
Let's call them Ovink rinks.
Ovink rinks,
yes,
right.
The Ovink rinks.
Ovink basketball rinks that are actually, below the surface of the ground that turn into water basins when it floods. They protect their electrical grid. They use tons of urban vegetation on roofs and throughout the city to really absorb that flood water. And, one of the things he said is that they have moved from a philosophy of dikes and dams to try to keep out the water, but to really absorb the water, to let it be a part of their life and come in.
Like that guy in X-Men. Remember in the first X-Men movie when they turn the senator into water and he becomes the ocean.
Oh, that's right.
He melts into the ocean.
But that senator learned his lesson.
He did, man.
He knew.
He became one with the water.
And Holland has learned their lesson.
And it's sad though, because my classic thing about this is you think of the Dutch boy with the finger in the dike.
Yeah.
Do you know that story?
Yes.
And in this story, there's no dike. Where does the boy put his finger? It's just water that's spewing over him all the time.
I'm kind of uncomfortable with where this conversation is going.
Sorry. That was a purely ecological metaphor.
No, it's true. The Dutch are moving away from, really what they were known as dikes. And they even talked about the system of floodgates that they built, and I think in the 50s that they even have rethought that. But this article is great, and he has a lot of really interesting quotes. And he met with communities in the U.S. to try to promote this Dutch system of flood mitigation. And he has a funny quote here. He says, for example, in New Jersey, he laid out a future situation in which rather than have each homeowner undertake difficult and expensive work, like raising houses on stilts, the community would embrace measures to protect the entire region from flooding. The response, he said, was, quote, that would be a socialistic approach.
Which I think may pinpoint why it hasn't been as successful as it might have been over here.
I think so. I think you're right. Also, though, the article ends with it's changing, and there was this huge New York City response to Sandy report. It was a 438-page report that had 250 recommendations, all how New York City could prepare for the next storm. And a lot of those suggestions were based on this Dutch model. However, he mentions that nowhere in the article did it include suggestions for New Jersey or Connecticut. So it's still this tendency to think, city, what can we do, and not regional flood approach. But it was written by the city, so you can understand kind of why it's.
I think you're a communist. I'm going to go on record right now.
You hate America.
We're many things, Andrew McMahon, but we are not socialists.
We are not socialists.
We are independent thinkers.
That's right. The last thing one of the things though, it talks about Hoboken, and Mayor Zimmer of Hoboken wants to use his approach. And she gave this example that, FEMA told her that they could provide funds for her for the protection of a fire station or a senior center, and she was like, well, I can use that money and buy a huge pump to protect the whole city of Hoboken. But, FEMA policy as it currently stands goes against that sort of thing. It's only, these kind of individually focused monies. So she thinks it's actually changing, and she thinks in 10 years that public perspective will move more toward these more community-based approaches, but she just thinks it's slow going. But she really wants to implement a lot of these things for Hoboken, and she wants to see, she feels like the next major storm, Hoboken will be protected if they can implement these things, and it'll prove that this system works.
I hope so. I mean, I have a healthy skepticism about this, not just because I think you're a communist, but also because, you want to prove it in a place like Hoboken, because I think I was looking at the cost estimates for some of this stuff, and a flood wall outside New York City that's like that one that you were talking about in Holland was something like $7 billion. I mean, it was just like this massive expense.
Right, this huge capital investment.
Right, and I would hate to do that and then have it not work, but.
Yeah, and the article talks about that, and it doesn't say why, but it said something like that would actually make flooding worse for New York City.
Yeah.
It doesn't say why or elaborate, but that was just one of the examples it uses as, that sort of trying to keep the water out as opposed to figuring out how to live with this type of flooding. That's going to be more and more common.
My favorite image of that whole story is this guy Hinkovink just showing up in America with like a little suitcase and a little like Dutch outfit on,
Yes,
little
wooden
wooden
boots.
shoes, obviously, because we're just completely being stereotypical here.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Please, sir, can I work for you?"
Yeah. Right. I mean, do you think this community engagement piece, I mean, we're already doing it here, right? I mean, community engagement is a big part, but do you really think this is the next big trend in emergency management?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to be, right? I mean, the whole deal about emergency managers is that they are really good at coordination because maybe they suck at everything else, right? But that's the thing that we have to be incredible at is connecting all these pieces, and that has to lead you to an approach like that.
Yeah, and I think, I think we do good at coordinating with each other. I think it gets a little more difficult to coordinate with agencies, people that aren't within the emergency management community. And that's kind of the art of it, is trying to engage these non-traditional emergency management people to kind of see the vision of this stuff.
One of the things I was looking at was I remember in 2006, this is complete sort of non sequitur, except it deals with the ocean. So I'm going to use the ocean as my non sequitur.
Nice.
There's a story about how all the fish would be dead by 2048.
Yeah.
Our second great name of the podcast, Dr. Boris Worm from Nova Scotia, said that by 2048, overfishing would have killed every fish in the ocean. Which is really sad for me because of my love for scallops, and prawns of various kinds.
Yeah.
Not to mention, life on Earth. And so it's funny for a couple of reasons. So this study came out, everybody jumped on it, and it's a good example of this kind of like emergency management, the sky is falling, here, let's jump on the next threat.
Right.
And then in 2009, Dr. Worm comes out with a kind of a retraction where he with some other scientists said, okay, you know what? People are working on this. Like, it's actually hopeful. People have been implementing these fishing measures. And so like 10 of the 13 places in the ocean he'd be looking at were actually better. And so he said, by 2048, he actually said he might have like a fish barbecue.
Wow.
And hopefully not just for the last fish. Like he would cook like the last 12 fish. But I think it was great for me because it showed that you could really be hopeful in terms of this climate change stuff, that the world might be falling apart, but there are things you could do. Except the problem is Ted Danson. Because
what did he do?
Well, Ted Danson in his spare time is an activist for this Oceana organization that made a movie called The End of the Line based on this idea that all the fish would die in 2048. And the movie just came out last year, not ever mentioning that like the paper and the theory that it was based on was like had been debunked like 5 years ago.
Oh no.
So this, I think, is the trick with all these things, whether it's Hinkovink or Boris Worm, any of these guys. That you can never quite trust the science.
Right.
You have to really get to the bottom of what the truth is.
I feel like this article is kind of in the same light as, I remember hearing stories like garbage. Garbage is overtaking. We're going to bury ourselves in garbage. But like that was like in the 80s growing up, I remember hearing that story. The landfills are overflowing. We don't have any more room for garbage. But the fact is like they got better at figuring out how to compress it, compact it, how to deal with it. And that's not a problem anymore.
Well, I don't know. Then we still have it. Well, here's the thing. Here's what I remember about that. The satellite imagery from the MH370 plane flight, one of the reasons they felt like they couldn't find the plane was because of all the floating garbage.
Oh,
it was in the Indian Ocean. And so
man.
they kept mistaking it for airplanes.
So that's where it's all going. It's all going to the ocean.
That's right. So it's fine. At least it's in the southern hemisphere.
Right. Oh, wait. Oh, next article. Oh, yes. So next article. Taking you now to the Pacific Northwest.
I love our transitions. Can I just say, we have no means of actually doing transitions, so we just like stare at each other until one of us starts talking.
I was waiting for the music, but I guess we don't really do music.
Yeah, what happened to because we're in the rundown of news, so I was waiting for segment changes.
But I just frantically pointed at each other.
We'll just do this. Are you happy now? Are you happy now,
No, that is good.
Okay.
All right, so Portland, Oregon. I saw this one on NBC Nightly News, and then we'll post a Yahoo article about it. They ditched 38 million gallons of drinking water from a reservoir after a teenager was caught on video peeing in it. So they did tests. There's no contamination in it whatsoever, but they decided to go ahead and alleviate public concerns and flush this huge 38 million gallon reservoir. And so this Los Angeles Times person wrote an article about it, and he was like, really, Portland, you have to flush 38 million gallons of potable water for the sake of a cup or two of human urine, because they're running out of water down there. And so they're like, just don't forget about us down here without any water. So my question to you is, what is this? Is this a good example of government getting out ahead of a possible public relations nightmare, or is this an overreaction to a possible issue?
Which seems like it wouldn't be a hard question, but it actually sort of is. Like, it brings to mind two things. Right? First is the West Virginia chemical contamination that we talked about, where they were requesting FEMA bottled water to keep coming in even after the disaster was over because people were afraid of the water. And in that situation, I had great sympathy for it.
Right.
But then you contrast it with the case of Wichita Falls in Kansas, which is about to be the second Texas city, the first sort of largest Texas city that is going to a wastewater treatment drinking system. So half of their drinking water is going to come straight from wastewater treatment.
Right. And
the desperation of that drought really makes me feel like that the Seattle town is being ridiculous,
right.
Although Wichita Falls is having a really hard time with this. Like, they're really grossed out by this idea.
Right.
Even though basically what the city is doing the same treatment process that,
pretty much any
you
city
dump the
does.
Stuff into a river anyway, and
right.
then the next city down gets the stuff you dumped into the river, and then
right.
they treat
cleans it up and
yeah. So I don't think they should have flushed it. They should have flushed the kid for urination.
Yeah, they still haven't arrested the kid as the writing of this article. But yeah, it's interesting they made this decision to flush down that much water. They justified it by listen, we have thankfully a lot of water, and it's not a problem. We're not wasting it. It's not costing any money. So interesting. All right, so we wanted to revisit an article that we talked about, or an event we talked about in a previous podcast. And this was the Texas fertilizer plant explosion. So just to remind you, 15 people died. Most of them were firefighters. 160 people were injured. Hundreds of homes and buildings, including a senior center and a school, were leveled or ruined, and $100 million of damage was done. The explosion left a 93-foot wide and 10-foot deep crater. So not much has changed, unfortunately. And this article comes from The Wire, and we'll post it on our website. But there's one of the issues the author mentions is a lack of regulation in Texas. And it quoted a Texas congressman saying, there's no hope of passing additional regulations through the state legislature. And I was shocked by this, but their fire codes in rural counties are voluntary.
What?
And the fertilizer plant in West didn't volunteer to follow fire rules. And the county still has not adopted a fire code. So these companies can come in and basically decide if they want to, have proper storage treatment and proper fire codes in these places.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. So I'm just thinking, if you're an emergency manager in a small town like this, small county, how do you prepare your community in lack of regulation? Like, there's no regulations.
You know what this reminds me of is there's this town outside Chicago in the 80s that had a catastrophic fire, and I think it was, and the fire chief in the town was like this really smart guy, and what he did was he knew that throughout the town there was not a good fire hydrant system. There wasn't a good water pumping system. And so he'd known it for 10 years. He'd gone to the city council every year. They hadn't fixed the problem. So he'd written up legislation. And the day after that fire, he took it to the city council and he says, now you have to pass this for 100, let's say 100 fire hydrants. Okay. Yeah. And because it was the day after the fire, the city council passed it, but they said, we're going to fund half this year. We're going to fund half next year because it's so expensive.
Right.
So what do you think happens?
Half of it got funded.
Right. They funded the half for that year, and then by the next year, they'd totally forgotten about it, and they used it for other priorities. Yeah. So the classic practitioner thing is, as a disaster manager, your policy window is so short after one of these things happens that I feel like if you're an emergency manager there, you've got to write up what you want, and you've got to keep it in your pocket, and like literally the day after something like this happens, you've got to kind of be like, I told you so.
Right. And here's how we have to change it, implement this. That's tough, though. I mean, this was a huge story. President Obama went there, went to the funerals. There was video of the explosions. And, I could just see this poor emergency manager is busy responding to the disaster, but I think that's why you got to, ahead of time, do your hazard analysis, have, like you said, it in the pocket of what legislation needs to change, and then pull that out as soon as stuff like this.
The other thing, right now in Oso, where the mudslide was,
right.
In the adjacent county, the county, whatever the legislature is called there, was looking at this bill to prohibit development in places that were mudslide evacuation zones. And they voted it down. They were like, no, if we want to build there, we should still, be able to build there.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's sort of right or wrong, but it points to this line between how quickly kind of the emotion after something like that dries up. This is a classy one. All right. So this is actually hard to talk about. I was going to do one more story. I'm going to have to edit this part out.
Just let it ride.
Really?
We're a little rusty. It's been a few weeks.
Yeah, I know, right? This is great. It's like watching a backstage. It's like behind the music, but in front of the music.
I swear we're really good emergency managers. We do plan. It's just not this podcast this week.
All right, so we'll talk about this less painful thing, and then we'll talk about this other more painful thing. So, all right. So I read this study. So the United States Geological Service put out this paper, and it said that, all right, in Oklahoma, since October 2013, which is not that long ago,
right.
Okay, the earthquakes in Oklahoma have gone up by 50%.
That's crazy.
Like if you look at the graph, they just skyrocket.
This is like the movie Volcano.
Exactly like that. They called in Tommy Lee Jones.
They should measure the temperature of lakes to see if the temperature has gone up.
Oh, that's really well. What they actually did is seriously.
Tell me that happened.
No, they did. Well, it did sort of. They measured the temperature of underground reservoirs.
Oh wow.
Though and what's happening in Oklahoma is there's a lot of hydrologic fracturing for oil and gas stuff, and so what they're doing is they're spewing wastewater down into the earth to get rid of it as a waste product after doing this. And so they're spewing that down into the tectonic plates, right? And so the United States Geological Service said that, you know what, the earthquakes may be like skyrocketing because you're doing so much of this. You're injecting the wastewater in there, and it's called injection-induced seismicity. And so for half a century, they've been watching this happen as this hydrologic fracturing has been happening.
Right.
So the funny thing about this is, to me, is they put out this study, all right, and they said this is a big problem. The U.S. Geologic Service did. And then the next day, the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association said, it's probably not really a problem. We think it's fine. We're going to pull together some folks. We're going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But then the Oklahoma Geological Survey put out a press release, which is interesting because most press releases are like on letterhead and fancy paper or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is just like, it's clearly like typed in Word with like bullets using like Times New Roman.
Nice. Yeah.
And it basically said, this may or may not be a problem. We don't have enough evidence to say that this is really happening because these earthquakes are lower down in the Earth's structure and the wastewater is higher up.
Yeah.
But we can point to 2 earthquakes where it did happen, where we did see how wastewater directly affected causing the earthquakes. But we're not ready to say it's the other. It's causing these other earthquakes. It's like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth.
Interesting.
And
so they kind of walked back a little bit from saying, we think fracking is causing these earthquakes.
Right.
But they didn't completely close the door by saying it doesn't cause it.
Absolutely. So they've doubled the amount of earthquake monitoring that's happening there, and we're going to see. But to me, this is a great example of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Right? You're shooting all this wastewater into the earth. You don't know exactly what it's doing, and then suddenly you get an effect like this, and you're looking at this effect. You're looking at more earthquakes. And you're saying, well, maybe this is causing or maybe it's not. And the problem is, by the time you actually have a causal link, like a bad earthquake will already have happened.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's this classic disaster thinking paradigm of by the time you figure out what the problem is, it's already occurred, and then you're dealing with the consequences.
Right, yeah. It's interesting, the link that seems to happen more and more from environmental issues and emergency management. Like I just remember when I was in school for emergency management back in 96 to
you are old.
I am old. It was kind of like man-made disasters and natural disasters, and those are the two things we had to deal with. And now we have all of these kind of environmentally produced, disasters that are a little bit of both. They're kind of man-made and kind of natural. Wildfires. Why are the wildfires getting worse? And well, we're urban sprawl, and we're building now where it used to be, forest land, things like that. And like this fracking is another great example. Our reliance on fossil fuels, is that causing more of these earthquakes to happen?
You ready? I'm going to drop something really deep on you.
First of all, I sound so liberal in this
You really do.
I'm like talking about socialism.
Right.
And, what have I become?
I know. Who are you, Texan? Go Cowboys. This is my wisdom. You ready? I'm
ready.
summoning Confucius.
Yes.
Okay. Every disaster is man-made.
Boom, boom, boom.
Because, right, it's the presence of humanity that makes it a disaster. So without the humanity, there is no disaster. Therefore, humanity creates the disaster. See, how was that for a transition?
That was a great transition.
Wasn't that was awesome.
And I think you're absolutely right.
I think, I don't know. That actually brought me back a little, so I'm sort of less depressed about our next topic. So I'm glad we had that little shenanigan there, because this makes me really pissed off.
Yeah,
like I am just incredibly pissed off by this entire South Korea Sewell Ferry disaster. So as of today, the death toll is at 269. There are 35 still unaccounted for, which means they're dead, which means there are 304 people dead, which means that like more than 80% of these high school students who were juniors in high school who were on their class trip are dead. A diver died yesterday trying to do body recovery. The assistant principal of the school committed suicide.
Right.
I mean, it is just
it's just like every day it's just more horror stories coming out of this. I remember that, in some of the early days when they were recovering the bodies, the news would play audio clips of the parents in these tents identifying the bodies, and you could just hear them screaming. And I mean, it was just like the worst. And these poor families were in this reception, sheltered kind of place, and they would play up on video walls descriptions of bodies that they would find. Just play it up on the screen, and then the parents would get up and go. I mean, it's just like
they were watching footage of divers underwater recovering bodies in the ocean. Like,
were they really? They had live
they were
feeds
showing
of
that it was like recorded. They were like, here, watch this recorded feed of this diver finding bodies and see if you recognize any of the bodies. And it just, the entire thing makes me so incredibly angry. The prime minister's resigned now. He said
they're investigating the entire ferry industry, and also like I think like even other means
the
of
regulators, all this stuff. And so, because this is what we do, right? I broke it down like minute by minute, sort of, so we're gonna walk through sort of the 40 minutes of this and how it happened. And I'm gonna stay kind of dry because it is too painful to even contemplate. Mm-hmm. So a couple of things you should know right off the top, right? So this ferry, Sewell, was one of two ferries that the company ran this route on. They bought the ferry used 2 years ago. When they bought it, they added 2 additional floors on top of it. So you have a car ferry, right? So it means there's a whole automobile floor that water's washing in on all the time. They added 2 additional floors on top of it. And they removed a ramp from the side and moved it to the other side of the vessel, and they decreased the ballast capacity in order to do that, which basically means, I mean, if you just think about a ship and adding more height to it, that you're making it less stable.
Right, yeah. It's sitting higher out of the water now. Right,
exactly. And so the 2 mitigation things were, it was then rated for a fully weighted capacity of like 3,900 tons, But that fully weighted capacity was supposed to include ballast. Like it was supposed to have half of that was ballast. It was water to keep the ship stable, and the other part was cargo. Mm-hmm. And so when they were running it, though, they were running it with like 3,700 tons of cargo with decreased ballast, meaning that all of that weight was on top and it was unsecured. And they were doing that to make money. The regulatory failure just so you can see how all of these pieces mesh together in creating a disaster, right? That's the business practice that's unfair. The regulatory level, they were supposed to report that to one of two agencies. They could either report it here or over here, which means there wasn't a unified list of it. And the regulator was not a public agency, but a private contractor that was supported by the ferry industry that made its money by selling insurance to the ferry operators, right? So it made its money off the ferry operators. It was reviewing the books, and it never understood that distinction between cargo weight and fully loaded weight. So to me, these are the systemic things that create the disaster, and they all add up to just people not paying freaking attention to what's happening.
Right.
So that's all before. So, and everybody knows that what was happening is the captain was, I don't know, jerking off in his bedroom or something, and the third mate was actually driving the boat. Do you know that part of the story?
Yeah. I knew he wasn't at the wheel.
It was this weird thing where 10 minutes before the ferry turned, he like runs into the cabin, and he's like, "You okay, third mate?" And he gives him some instructions, and then he goes back to his cabin. And I found this great website, which everybody should read on this. It's called askakorean.blogspot.com, and it's this Korean dude who's translating all of the internal Korean news on this issue, which is the best kind of breakdown of it I've found. So anyway, here's what happened. I'm going off the transcript from the vessel Sewell to the harbor operator. Okay, so go to the morning that happens, 8:55 a.m. The Sewell radios Jeju, which is their destination, and they say the ship is rolling. So there are two problems with that. The first problem is, in an emergency, a ferry vessel is supposed to notify the closest port. The reason being, that's where the rescue would come from.
Right.
So they didn't. The closest port is Jindu. They radioed the destination port instead, which is another like hour and a half away.
And possibly the result of the third mate at the wheel and not the captain, right?
Right.
Possibly the third mate didn't know you were supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely, because he'd been working for 9 months for the company, and he never sailed through this area again. Okay, so he says the ship is rolling. Okay, so and at this point, the ship is rolling. He means that it's listed about 20 degrees off.
Okay.
And what had happened was it seems like either the third mate made a mistake or the rudder malfunctioned. The third mate turns a corner too fast. Okay, now he turns it. Maybe it's too fast. It's not much too fast is the point. But because the cargo is unsecured and the ship's unbalanced, the ship starts rolling sideways. So they start panicking. And at that point, the captain comes running into the cabin in his underwear. It's just ridiculous. So the Jeju says they're going to notify the Coast Guard. They ask for people to come quickly. Okay. So then at 8:58, so then 3 minutes go by without any contact with the vessel. Okay, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're in a disaster situation like that, the ongoing communication is really important.
Right.
And the loss of those 3 minutes, it seems like, allowed the ship to list another like 20 degrees. Like it starts listing really fast. And the other part about this is it seems like in those 3 minutes, the captain runs in, they have confused communication on the cabin, and what they do is, instead of being on this channel or Jindu rating for Coast Guard help, they call back to the company to tell the company that there's a problem happening, which is a hierarchical problem in a disaster.
Right.
People start, instead of making their own decisions, they want to get higher up authorities to sign off on what they're doing.
Right.
So this captain wants sign off, and he loses these kind of 3 crucial minutes. They radio Jeju. They have to change channels. That loses another minute. So again, in a disaster, if you're on the wrong communications channel with somebody, that loses really precious time.
Right.
And I don't want to harp on this kind of minute by minute, but the consequences are so catastrophic for every minute you lose that it becomes really important. The other important thing to know, do you know this part, is who made the first emergency call from the ship?
I think wasn't it a cell phone from one of the passengers?
Yeah,
was it a kid?
It was a kid.
Ugh.
A kid calls like the equivalent of 911, which is 119, and reports to the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard, they do okay. I mean, they're not used to this kids calling them.
Yeah.
But what they do is they ask the kid for the latitude and longitude of the boat.
Wow.
And, the kid's in level 4 of the boat. He has no idea.
Yeah.
And so it stalls out that call, waiting for that bit of information. So they lose time there. Okay.
And at no point yet has the evacuation been sounded on the boat. Like, are they ringing alarms and telling people to get life jackets on at this point?
What an ironic question that you ask, Andrew. So no, right? What they do is they haven't done anything yet. At 9 a.m., so about 5 minutes have passed now. They radio Jeju and they say the ship is tilted to the left and the containers fell over. So that means the containers weren't secured. So that's going to quadruple the problem because the weight of all of these containers is falling over. So the Jeju says, is there any damage to people? And Sewell says, it's impossible to confirm. We can't move since the body of the ship is tilted. It's ridiculous because they have a communication system and they have crew members below deck.
Right.
So like if you're saying there's no damage to people, that's like the easiest thing to confirm.
Right.
And Jeju says, all right, put on life vests and get people ready to abandon ship, which is I think a very clear and concise instruction.
Right.
And it happens at 9 a.m. So we should just note it is 9 a.m. Jeju says, get everybody in life vests, abandon ship.
Right.
And Sewell says it's hard for people to move. And then
because the ship's tilting so
because
much.
the ship is tilting. But again, at this point, it's tilting 45 degrees, which is a hard angle.
Right.
Okay? It's a scary, terrifying angle, but it is
still
not impossible.
Right.
All right. So 5 minutes go by. And in those 5 minutes, apparently what happened is the crew calls the company again, I don't know why. They're going to call in this half an hour, they're going to call the company 6 times.
Oh, my.
And they're going to tell the people to go below deck. They're going to tell all the students to go below deck.
Ugh.
And it is like unfathomable why. So there are 3 kind of theories for why they would do this. The captain said the miserable captain said afterwards that the water was really cold and the current was really fast, and he was worried if people evacuated ship before
ships were
nearby, that they would drown in the water. Which is, experts have said, that's not unrealistic, but what you do is you summon them to the deck itself.
Right.
You secure them to the deck, and that way they're sort of ready for whatever happens.
Right.
You don't keep them below. The second thing that I've read which is I think it was in the Mirror in the UK, is that there are previous ferry disasters, and what happens is when you ask people to evacuate on a listing ferry, they will all run to one side or the other, which will then increase the list of the vessel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All the people run one way, and that makes the vessel capsize.
Sure.
And they were trying to keep the people still to avoid making the situation worse. Which may make some rational sense, except it doesn't, because if they were up on the deck, you could both control them and they would be safe in the event of evacuation.
Right.
And the third theory is that the ship was trying, the company, when they called the company, wanted them to keep the people on the vessel to decrease liability, because the communication they were having was that the vessel probably wasn't going to tip over, and it would just cause a big panic if everybody jumped off the boat, right? And so keep them on the boat, and then the vessel will right itself, then everybody will be happy, and there won't be a big news story, right?
So we have kind of incident command from afar, right? We have someone who's not a part of the situation, doesn't have the full picture, making tactical decisions on what to do.
And we have a lack of prioritization, right? When you're an incident commander, you're taught to prioritize 3 things. You prioritize life safety first, then you prioritize the protection of property and the environment. You know what I mean? And you prioritize the safety of your responders. Mm-hmm. And they weren't prioritizing any of those things. They were prioritizing the vessel, and they were prioritizing
legal ramifications. Right. It sounds like,
with a totally inaccurate picture of the situation. So then what happens is Jeju notifies the Coast Guard in this 5 minutes that go by. Jeju radios Jinju, which, as I said, is the closest one. That's where the rescue is actually going to come. So Jeju's got their head on straight. They're like, here's who you really need to be talking to. They transfer them over. And then basically what happens is for the next 20 minutes, 20 ridiculous minutes, Jindo keeps saying, have the passengers evacuated? Have they boarded a life raft or rescue boats? And Sewell says, they haven't yet. They can't move because the vessel is listed. And so Jindo asks how many people, and then they say they're getting fishing boats, and Sewell says the ship is listed too much. We can't do anything with the people. And in all of this time, they have not made an announcement to the people. They have not notified the junior crew below decks about what is happening. They have not broadcast on the PA system what is happening, an evacuation order, an order of any kind of instructions. They haven't done anything except ask over and over again when more boats are going to come.
Ugh.
So by 9:17, Sewell says the ship is listed 50 degrees to the port side. So we've lost like 30 degrees, and they say people are not going to move. The people can't move now. But I mean, I would argue that if your life is frickin' in danger and you're a junior in high school and somebody tells you to get out in a 50-degree situation, I mean, not everybody's going to get out, but you're not going to have more than 300 casualties in that situation.
Right, and you're going to have people trying to get out.
Right, if they were instructed. But they were instructed by both the senior crew, and then the junior crew kept reiterating those instructions. We were told to stay put. We were told to stay put. We will get more information soon.
Right.
And so they keep everybody in there. And this is the thing that really, this is like a rant. I'm like on a Lewis Black rant by now. But at 9:17, Jindo asks Sewell how the flooded condition is, and Sewell says, "We've alerted the crew members to wear life jackets and wait. It's impossible to confirm whether or not they wore, and crew members are at the bridge and are unable to move. Please hurry." So their message is, we're stuck here.
Come save us.
Come save us.
Here in the bridge.
Right. And we told everybody else to put life jackets on. But that literally is the only instruction that they were given at that point, is put life jackets on. And Jindo says, okay, we got that. How is the flooded situation? They ask over and over again, tell passengers to wear life jackets, tell them to get off. And this is the other thing. At 9:23, Sewell says they're unable to broadcast on the PA system. But concurrent cell phone videos, like the video you were talking about, show that they were still broadcasting at that point. They were just broadcasting repetitive messages about life jackets.
Oh, man.
So, I don't know. It just sort of gets worse from there. The last thing that happens is that Jindo says, please someone inform the passengers to wear life jackets. And Sewell says if the passengers escape, will they be rescued immediately? Because they're stuck on this narrative of if people get in the cold water, they'll die. And this is another thing that happens in disasters when you're in that moment of crisis and you stick on an idea. Sometimes you fixate on that idea,
right,
and it freezes you. And it seems like they got kind of frozen on this idea. And they ask that over and over again. Jindo says the captain should make the decision to escape. Okay, so the captain has to make that decision. And Sewell says again, that's not what I meant. If passengers escape, can they be immediately rescued? And then they have this argument about how long it's going to take. And then they say there's a helicopter coming. And it just, every minute of that, what I see in my brain is like every minute of that, 10 people die.
Right.
Every time they have an exchange like that where communication has a problem and Sewell is making a stupid decision and there's incompetence happening and poor communication, like you just watch bodies happen.
I mean, this is just the worst. It's just bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And, with 304 real consequences to those bad decisions being made. I mean, I don't even know where to start on this.
Yeah, I don't know. And what happens is the people that were on the port side escaped. By 9:37, the last transmission that they recorded, the ship was listing 60 degrees by then. But the thing I would note is, the Coast Guard didn't come with divers. They were able to rescue seven passengers, 7 kids, by breaking a window on that port side, like clambering over the top of it and reaching down in there.
Oh, wow.
Which means that even if the passengers had not been able to escape, if they had just left the 4th floor kind of rooms that they were stuffed into, where they were waiting, if they'd just gotten closer to that air side, right, you would have been able to rescue
some of them.
So many more of them,
right,
because of that.
This also makes me think of the airline industry here, that every flight goes through a safety briefing, tells you exactly what to do if there's an emergency. And I haven't been on a cruise, but I think they do the same type of thing. And I wonder if that was done here.
They were supposed to. In the manual, actually, the emergency manual, right? The fabled emergency manual that in this case, people usually do read and use. They're supposed to tell the passengers what these muster points are. Like in an emergency, you'll be asked to muster at these locations and point out on a map where those muster points are. Yeah. So that over the PA system, they would just say, proceed to muster points, and people would be able to do it. And obviously they didn't do that.
You know, it's just life comes at you so fast, and life can change so fast. And this is a good reminder next time we have building fire drills when everybody rolls their eyes and like, oh, I gotta get up and go here, you know. But like those type of drills can really save lives, and especially in a crisis situation like this shows. You're not clear-headed, you're not making good decisions, you're not communicating well, and you have to kind of rely on instincts. And the reason we do these monotonous drills and ask people to, you know, airlines do these to show you how to buckle your seatbelt and ask you to read the information card is so that gets ingrained, and so it's instinctual that you know how to open that window, or you know how to put the mask over yourself before you put it on your kids so that you don't pass out and you can help others. Yeah. You know, it's just a good reminder that sometimes the things that seem boring are really, really important.
I think that's right. And I guess the thing that I would end with is that, you know, the captain, actually not even the third mate, but the captain was like a backup captain. Wow. He wasn't the first line captain. He was like a contractor captain, and he was only used when either of the other two captains couldn't be used. And I think the other thing I would say is you really have to have experienced personnel who do have that kind of sense and instinct in their bones. Yeah. Or you have these horrific consequences.
It's interesting too, the tie-in that needs to be done with emergency management and response and regulation. You know, I know that happens a lot with the fire service. You know, you see. I know here in the city you see firemen going into businesses and asking to see their evacuation plans and doing, you know, spot inspections, but I don't know how much that happens on the emergency management side. This is kind of going back to the point we made about should emergency management have regulatory authority, you know, to enforce some of these very hazardous industries. I don't know.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially because in this case, the Coast Guard response has been criticized. But, I mean, in this case, it's just the very small tip of a massive chain of disasters. I feel like they did, honestly, pretty well under terrible circumstances.
Yeah, right. All right, let's move on to a listener question, an actual listener question.
Not a psychotic delusion of a listener question.
A real one.
Good.
This is from, we need a made-up name.
Hinkovink.
Hinkovink. Good one. All right, Hinkovink. Hey guys, about 9 months ago, I joined my local CERT, Community Emergency Response Team, here in San Diego. I've been very active ever since. I kind of caught the emergency management disaster response bug.
Which is a real bug. It's a real bug, by the way. It has a case fatality rate of 3%. It's really bad. Stay away from it. You bleed from the eyes.
So I caught the bug and now want to make it a career. I've taken some of the free ICS courses on the FEMA website and plan to take many more. But do you guys have any advice on how to get more ingrained in emergency management, including whether I should consider going back to school to get a degree in emergency management or public health? Thanks, and keep up the good work.
No. You got to read the part where he says the good stuff about us. You got to do that part.
All right. He says, as someone who's a total rookie in the field, I was pumped to find your podcast. You guys do a great job keeping it fresh.
Look at that.
And topical.
See, we got to have the love from Hinkovink. The Netherlands loves us.
Love forever, Hinkovink. All right. So this is similar to the question we had a few weeks ago. You know, new to the field. How do I get into this field? Do I go back to school and get a degree? What do I do?
And to help us answer this question, we have an actual educator here with us. We do Dr. Jordan Pascoe, who is a professor in philosophy at Manhattan College, which is in the Bronx, who is joining us from a great distance. She has traveled to be with us here tonight.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and she just full disclosure, we're married, so she came from upstairs, but it's a long way.
It's a long way.
It really is. It's like acres and acres of space between here and upstairs.
A vicious, treacherous journey.
He won't install a zip line.
I know. We really should though. We should have a zip line and a fireman's pole.
Yep.
All kinds of things.
Parachute,
like that.
second story parachute to get out the window.
That's important. We do. You know, we do have one of those emergency ladders.
That's good.
Yeah, those are important. Okay, so
all right, back to the question.
Right, exactly. So one reason that Dr. Pascoe's here tonight is that she just taught a class on emergency management for sort of non-emergency management people, although it was a practical. So I wondered if you could just kind of tell us about that.
Sure. I taught a class on disaster ethics. It was a section of an ethics course up at Manhattan College. And we basically we learned about 6 major moral theories. We applied those to disasters. We did case studies of a couple of different disasters, including the 1906 earthquake, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy. And then I made my students write imaginary disaster plans.
Wow.
We do that. We write a lot of imaginary disaster plans.
Yeah, unfortunately, ours are imaginary too.
So did they like it?
They loved it. They were incredibly enthusiastic about it and actually ended the class really with the same question, which was, is this a real job and how do I get it?
That's awesome. So it's a similar question to Hinko Vink. So what did you tell them? How did they...
I told them it was a real job. Yeah. Most of them...
Good. I was wondering myself, so it's good to know.
Most of them are students in the School of Business and School of Engineering. And so I told them that those were both actually good avenues for getting into emergency management.
Absolutely.
In different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing about that is, I think one thing that does is when you're a person like that coming from another field, you kind of can get sucked in by the drama of catastrophes, and kind of the excitement and the adrenaline of it. And I think one really important element of education for this stuff is sort of getting past that, right? You never really want to be riding the adrenaline in an actual disaster. Like one thing I thought the CDC did really well when MERS-CoV appeared in the States last week was just calming everybody down. There's nothing to see here. It's all going to be fine. I think that's a really important element of an emergency manager's education, which is one reason I would say that a degree like public health, something like that, a lot of times is better than an actual emergency management degree because it gives you that kind of grounding in another sort of field. So you're not just thinking about disasters all the time.
Right. With public health, you can specialize in biostats or epidemiology or GIS, some tangible skill that you can bring to emergency management. So I would say, if you have the time and the resources to get a degree, I don't think it'll hurt you as long as you don't sacrifice kind of that real experience with your CERT team or volunteering with an agency, something like that.
I think things I would love to see in applicants for this kind of stuff is if you're a volunteer EMT, I think that's a really great hands-on experience out there in the field that kind of grounds you and gets some of that adrenaline out of you when you go on calls in an ambulance that I think start to drain away some of that stuff. The other thing is volunteering for the Red Cross. The Red Cross has disaster assistant teams that they'll fly you across the country to work on disasters. They're pretty easy to get into. If you can give the time to that, that's actually a great experience. And if you're there on a long enough deployment, it counts as work experience. And that's a great sort of resume builder that you can do in the field.
Yeah, and I would say also that, an internship is not a guarantee for a position with that company, that you really have to work the hardest you've ever worked when you're in an internship if you want to turn that into a job. So it's not, just kind of kick back, work part-time it's like you really, really have to work hard when you're doing that internship.
And the other thing is, people from other fields often do really well in emergency management because it's about coordination and you can bring these skill sets to bear in a lot of ways. The best disaster logistician I've ever met was a guy who had a background in restaurant management, who just learned he did the bills, he did the ordering, he got the bar stocked, and that was sort of great training for what you need to stock an emergency management logistics center. Yeah. So I think you can bring something like that to bear too.
Yeah. So, even if you don't have a degree in emergency management, it doesn't automatically disqualify you from getting into the field at all. In fact, it could be an advantage.
Did you see that in your students, like that they brought these kind of skills they had into the emergency plans that they did?
Yeah, I did. I certainly think that the business students brought that to bear, and the engineering students had a lot to bring to the table, and were able to draw on, concepts like resilience and engineering in thinking about disaster and recovery. I will say that I do think that when it comes to disaster planning, it's possible that we don't want too many philosophers doing disaster planning, because I had them apply different ethical theories to disaster plans, and they applied those theories pretty well, but what it led to were ideas like parachuting into the 1906 earthquake, which is just historically impossible.
Like,
They didn't have parachutes? They had parachutes in 1906.
Did they have airplanes?
I think the problem is the airplane.
Blimps, Zeppelins, maybe from Zeppelins.
That's right.
Maybe from
That's when you need some Zeppelins.
During a fire.
Actually, that's really what you want is like a Zeppelins over fires, right? This is cascading systems failure is really what we're doing now.
So I was like, excellent use of Aristotle, questionable use of...
Tactically, it might be...
It's a little unsound.
It'd be hard.
So what are we saying? We're saying, I mean, I'm not against emergency management degrees. I mean, I have issues. I think in the past few years, a lot of colleges have like thrown together emergency management degrees to like make money. Like, hey, come work on emergencies, and they have no idea what they're doing. So I think you need to make sure you have a good emergency management program first off, if you're going to do that. Otherwise, it's just not a useful degree.
Yeah, and I think, we both have degrees. In emergency management, we like the degrees. We think they helped us, but equally so, if not more so, is that practical experience in whatever field and being able to apply that experience to emergency management. I think a hiring manager will really look.
And that's the thing about a CERT team is that CERT teams, great preparedness work. They're not going to deploy unless you get a disaster in the area. So I would look for domestic disaster experience, EMT experience, or international disaster experience. Those are the things without actually getting a job that can build your resume in the most substantial ways.
Or hospitals, right? Hospitals respond to emergencies all the time. There's always something going wrong at a hospital. So volunteer for a local hospital.
All right. Good luck. Oink of ink.
Yes, let us know what happens.
Absolutely. And then we should put together like a guide, 1 to 10, getting yourself hired as an emergency manager.
Yeah.
We're just going to keep Dr. Pascoe around for the rest of it. All right, we got a new segment. You ready for the new segment, Noise? We're going to do this all the time. You ready?
Drone watch.
No, could you understand that?
It's so fast. It's
Yeah,
hard.
I know.
I knew what he was saying.
We got to
so
let's do it again.
Drone watch.
It sounds like drone launch. Like launch the drones.
It's drone watch.
Drone
we'll
watch.
just do like drone watch. We watch the drones that are watching us.
Now that I know to look for drones in the news, they're like everywhere.
Yeah,
every night.
They're like all over.
Yeah.
Every night there's drones.
There was one that hit a building in St. Louis. Drones flying around in St. Louis hit the side of a building, collapsed. Now drones are banned in St. Louis. They're like, no more drones. They also,
the building didn't collapse, right?
The drone collapsed. Yeah, the drone couldn't take it. Yeah. But they also banned them in Yosemite. They banned them in national parks.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that, I wonder? Scaring the animals?
I don't know. Animals were scaring the drones. The drones were like terrified of all the bison.
Well, last week, the big storms that came through the Midwest and the South, there were drones flying over all the damage areas. So I think disaster tornado chasers, now they all have drones that they deploy as, to survey the disaster areas.
We need to get a drone. We need to get a Dukes of Hazzard
drone. We need
a
podcast drone.
And like paint it orange and just like fly it around.
Yeah.
With a little sign attached to the back of it.
We can live stream our podcast as it's going on from 10,000 feet.
No, that's genius. And all the birds can hear it.
So every week, I also want this to be a regular segment. So when the drones take over, we'll have a record of me saying, I knew it. I knew they were going to take over.
That's right.
We'll have this
so
audio recording
with
that
your
will
last
survive.
dying breath, when the drones kill you
be
for
like,
revenge.
I told you so. I told you.
I mean, if you guys do get a drone, could it also have other functions like air freshening or scrubbing things?
You want to get it like a cleaning drone?
Yeah,
I mean,
we could put a duster on one of the
Right?
blades.
What would you call it?
Great.
Instead of a Roomba, it would be like an Airba.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I don't understand why you would get a robot that wasn't doing some kind of work for you.
Yeah, no, that's right. It'll give us surveillance, situational awareness, and leave a nice lemony fresh scent.
Yeah, we can.
Sorry. I'm like, I've got a punchline.
It's too late now. It's
I know,
ruined.
and we're moving on. All right. Here's the thing. We're proud of FEMA for this last one. We're really proud.
I am. Yeah. No, it's great. This is a good PSA.
They really did something good here. So we're gonna listen to a little FEMA action. Craig Fugate, you're the man. This is a family that's sitting down.
To talk about, but we should. Okay. So who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice.
And I'll try to get the generator going without any gas.
Oh, let's not forget the cell phones, which probably won't work.
Right.
And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
Well, I think we couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
And then the title card says,
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Is that what it says?
it didn't actually say it. It said
perfect timing.
Winging it is not an emergency plan, which I think is funny because a lot of what I spout about is that winging it is an emergency. Like in an emergency, you have to wing it,
right?
But you have to wing it based on some kind of set of preparedness that's happening.
Is that why you refuse to prepare us for a disaster in any way, shape, or form, and just abandon me when
It's
they
so
hit?
funny. I got in trouble for not making a go bag during Sandy too. My wife was not happy. We now have a go bag.
You know what?
Kind of.
On Easter, we had 15 people over. And my friend Brian was here, and we were telling the story about how I refused to prepare, Jordan and the kids for this when I was gone. And Brian's dad, Ned Frederick, who invented Nike Airs, he's a biomechanical engineer for Nike. He sent me his go kit that he packed for himself and for Brian's brother Brendan, who lives in Brooklyn over here.
The list of it or the
list of it.
Oh, okay.
He sent the
All
list, which we're gonna post on the site. We've got to post this list, and we're gonna go through it in detail in a future episode. It has fold up camel bags. It has crowbars.
Wow.
It has it's an in depth all you can eat special go kit.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's better than what I've done.
But
I love this PSA. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
It doesn't feature people screaming and running for their lives, which I think is a big plus.
I'm so glad we've gotten away from the graphic PSAs. I think humor is the way to go. And FEMA did a great job with this. I think it's great. I like how she's who's going to handle supplies? And no one talks for 30 seconds.
Right.
I mean, I do want to say that most of my personal disaster plan is speaking to the children in a calm voice.
Yeah.
It's an important role.
That's what I've done.
That's the only one that's really good.
Yeah, they get it right.
Yeah, that's right. Except, the only problem is that fake calm voice that you get. Do you know what I mean? That fake calm, everything is falling apart.
Yeah.
But I still have to speak in a fake calm voice.
Right.
No, I mean, that's what happened during Hurricane Sandy when you went to work and the power company called us and told us they were turning off the electricity, and I realized that we had failed to buy batteries, and I was like, kids, it's going to be fine. We'll find some candles. It'll be totally fine.
This is going to be a fun experience that we'll remember for the rest of our lives.
Seance. It's going to be super awesome.
You're never coming on this podcast again.
Who invited you? Go back upstairs.
So, but all right, go FEMA.
Good job, FEMA. Put out more like these, please.
You know what I want to see? A FEMA Funny or Die partnership. That's what we need to see in the future.
I do think emergency management agencies should hire comedians to do trainings every once in a while.
Yeah, that would be good.
You need Amy Schumer.
That would be awesome.
We do Amy Schumer, Wyatt Cenac.
Inside
they do
emergency management. All right, so that's it. Episode 6 is a wrap. That was fun. Okay, please don't rap.
No, I really
Please do not rap.
No, that's not a good idea.
So go to our website, Hazards Podcast, for links to all the articles we mentioned. You can email us at hazardspodcast@gmail.com with questions, suggestions, job announcements, grants,
requests for
RFPs.
educational. That's right.
Anything.
Yeah, you're consulting. You want those kinds
Suggestions.
of things.
Please review us on iTunes. That'll help us get our Budweiser sponsorship we're hoping to get. And
not after you've been such a socialist this episode. That's not going to happen.
Back to my American roots.
You're too liberal.
And thanks for everyone who's written us and given us feedback and sent us questions. Please continue to do so.
Wait, has anybody written us and given us feedback?
I mean, not hand letters, handwritten letters, but emails.
That's
We've gotten
true.
a few emails.
That's true.
Which is nice.
Absolutely. So thanks, everybody.
That's it. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks. Yes, thanks, Dr. Pascoe,
Thanks for
our
having
special
me.
guest. We don't actually have an address.
We have a P.O. box. I still can't believe you did that on GarageBand.